Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon for the 2014 Dyson Distinguished Lecture. As you know, the Dyson Lecture was endowed to bring a distinguished speaker on matters of legal and policy importance to the law school. I don't think you could imagine a more fitting speaker than the one we have this year. Professor Apriil will introduce our speaker. I'll just say, as the now one of the top 10 law schools for public service, I'm especially pleased that we have this year somebody who so exemplifies public service as this year's speaker, Professor Apriil.
Before I introduce Secretary Johnson, I want to thank all of the people both here at PACE and at the DHS who have been working tirelessly to put this program together, for all of their help and support. And I also want to welcome all of you and to thank you for being here. As you all know, we had some challenges getting to this day, and I appreciate that you were able to arrange your schedules to be here this evening. And last but not least, I want to thank Secretary Johnson for delivering this year's Dyson Lecture. I cannot overstate his commitment to coming to PACE. He's here despite 2 prior delays, the first as a result of President Obama nominating him to his current position, and the second as a result of Mother Nature's last blast of winter about 10 days ago. So I guess it's true what they say, the third time's the charm. Thank you very much. So Secretary Johnson graduated from Morehouse College and Columbia Law School. He made a decision early on that he wanted a career that included both private practice and public service. And in his case, either side standing alone, public or private, would constitute a successful career. But he has both. On the private practice side, Secretary Johnson found a private practice home in the New York City law firm of Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. He began work there in 1984, and that's where he's continued to practice law when not serving in the public sector. At Paul Weiss, Secretary Johnson has been a successful litigator, trying some very high-stakes commercial and criminal cases. He ultimately became a partner at Paul Weiss, and he was also elected a fellow in the prestigious American College of Trial Lawyers. Secretary Johnson first left Paul Weiss to work in the public sector in 1989 when he joined the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. As an assistant U.S. attorney, he tried or appealed more than 20 cases in about a 3-year period, focusing on cases involving public corruption. Then he returned to Paul Weiss. The second time he entered public service was in 1998 when President Clinton appointed him to serve as general counsel at the Air Force. And he served in that capacity until the end of the Clinton presidency and then returned once again to Paul Weiss. In 2008, President Obama called Secretary Johnson back to public service, asking him to serve as general counsel at the Department of Defense. At the Defense Department, Johnson led more than 10,000 lawyers. And while there, he co-authored a 250-page report that paved the way for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, allowing gay and lesbian service members to serve openly in the military. He also helped bring to an end the use of enhanced interrogation techniques, remarking in a speech at Oxford University in London that ending these techniques was, quote, consistent with the calls of many in our country, including our own military, that great nations simply do not treat other human beings that way. Another of Secretary Johnson's accomplishments at the Defense Department was his spearheading of reforms to the military commissions to include greater transparency and due process protections for the accused. At the end of President Obama's first term, J. Johnson briefly returned to private practice at Paul Weiss. Within months, though, President Obama called him back to public service, asking him to serve in his current capacity as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. After being confirmed by the Senate, Jay Johnson was sworn in as the fourth Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security on December 23, 2013. As Secretary, Jay Johnson oversees a department of more than 240,000 employees, and he must grapple with some of the most challenging issues of our time. Under his purview are issues related to immigration. He also oversees FEMA and virtually everything connected to the national security. Despite the many professional demands placed on him over the years, Secretary Johnson has been active in many civil and professional organizations. He chaired the Judiciary Committee of the New York City Bar Association. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he has served as director or trustee of the following organizations: Adelphi University, the Federal Bar Council, the New York Community Trust, the Fund for Modern Courts, the Legal Aid Society, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, the New York City Bar Fund, and he's not that old, the New York Hall of Science, and the Film Society of Lincoln Center. He was also on the Board of Governors of the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute. As impressive as his professional career has been, I have to say that Secretary Johnson is so much more than his resume. I have been a friend of his for more than 30 years, since we were students together at Columbia Law School. Secretary Johnson is a person with great integrity and a strong moral compass. He has good common sense, is a person of goodwill, and is a good friend. Thank you. The fact that he is here today is a testament to his character. For those of you who don't know the backstory, I asked Secretary Johnson to deliver the Dyson lecture about a year ago. That was during those few months between his departure from the Defense Department and his current position as Secretary of Homeland Security. He was back at Paul Weiss in a, relatively speaking for him anyway, low-profile position when I asked him to come here. But a funny little thing happened on his way to Pace. He became Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He could easily have said, you know, Barbara, I really don't think I can make it now. I oversee 240,000 employees and use FEMA to deal with immigration to oversee and the Homeland Security, for goodness sake. I can't come to Pace. But he never said that, and words cannot express how grateful I am. Secretary Johnson flew into New York this afternoon and is returning to Washington after today's program, but he kept us on his agenda. Even after last week's travel problems, it was Secretary Johnson who emailed me and said he wanted to reschedule and to come to Pace before the end of the semester. Secretary Johnson is a talented lawyer and litigator, a dedicated public servant, a good man, and a loyal friend. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, the Honorable J. Charles Johnson.
Professor Apriil, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I had a prepared speech, and for anyone who is really interested in reading it, I'll probably give it to you. I decided not to give a prepared speech and to just talk, which I frequently do this, drives my staff crazy. So I'm going to talk from my notes here. I actually grew up not too far from here in Wappingers Falls, New York. How many people here know where Wappingers Falls, New York is? Anybody here from Dutchess County by any chance? Yes. Where are you from, ma'am?
Dover Plains.
Dover Plains, not far from Wappingers Falls. I grew up in Wappingers Falls, New York in the Hudson Valley. You heard Barbara say that I was an assistant U.S. attorney for 3 years when I was a much younger lawyer. Being a young federal prosecutor is probably the best lawyer's job I will ever have. I learned so much. I learned how to try a case. I learned how to talk to juries. I learned how to speak without notes. I learned federal courts. I learned how judges think. I learned criminal law. I'll never forget the first opening statement I gave, I stood at the lectern and I said, "My name is Jay Johnson, I represent the government." And the first time I said that, it sounded really good. It sounded powerful, it sounded impressive that I represented the government. My second jury trial, I took it a step further, I got a little more carried away, and I said, "My name is Jay Johnson, I represent the United States government." And that, to me, even sounded more impressive. I represent the United States government. Third trial, I said, "My name is Jay Johnson." I pushed it to the edge. "My name is Jay Johnson, I represent the United States of America." You know, the supervisors tell you, you're really only supposed to say, "I represent the government." I represent the United States of America. The fourth trial, I really did cross the line. "My name is Jay Johnson. I represent the people of America," which drew an immediate objection from the defense lawyer. "Objection, Your Honor. He's trying to say to this jury that he represents them. He doesn't represent them. He represents the government." So, fifth trial, "My name is Jay Johnson. I represent the government." Eventually, I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was there for 3 years. I tried 12 cases. I argued 11 appeals. And as Barbara said, I went back to Paul Weiss. I went back to corporate litigation, some white-collar criminal defense. And then I joined the CJA panel in the Southern District of New York, the Criminal Justice Act panel. It's the federal version of the 18B panel in New York State, where you're available to take on cases as a court-appointed attorney for indigent criminal defendants. So I joined the CJA panel in about 1995, and maybe once or twice a year I was on call, I was on duty. So any case that came in where the defendant needed a lawyer and couldn't pay for the lawyer and legal aid was not available, they go into the CJA wheel and pull out a CJA attorney, and I would be on call to take on any case for which I was assigned. And it was an interesting day when you're on duty day. You get a variety of different cases. Some of them went to trial. I got this really interesting case that I drew, and it was a multi-defendant indictment. It was a really long indictment. It was like 25 defendants, and it was a really old indictment. And this defendant had been missing for the first trial. He was in the wind, and all of a sudden he was apprehended. He was found years later, and he was detained at the MCC next door. And I looked at this indictment. It was like hundreds of pages, racketeering, extortion, murder. I mean, I hope you're getting the picture here. And so I went into the MCC to meet with my new client, who was going to be presented in just a few hours or a few minutes. And I wanted to review with my client what you're supposed to do when you're assigned to represent a client in a criminal defense case. You want to review with the client the charges against him. And I went into the MCC, which is a maximum security facility, and I went into one of these rooms that has it's an attorney room, and it has a thick glass, and it's so secure that you walk in to this little room with this glass in it, and then the door closes right behind me and it locks, and then the client comes in on the other side of the glass, and the door closes behind him and it locks, and you can hear each other through the glass, but the doors are locked behind both of you. And so I tried to review the charges against my client, and the only thing my client said to me was, "I got to get out of here." And I said, "But you understand that there's this 212 count indictment against you for all these things. I got to get out of here. I got this thing." And I said, "But you understand that you're really not likely to get bail. You've been missing for the last couple of years. You're a fugitive. The government is going to consider you a flight risk. I got to get out of here. I got this thing at 4 o'clock." To just get me out of here. Just do whatever you can. I got this thing, but you're facing probably life imprisonment. You're facing, under the federal sentencing guidelines, thousands of months if you are convicted of these charges. I got this thing. I've got to do this at 4 o'clock. I got this thing. And I said, eventually after him telling me this was all he could focus on for like 20 minutes, I said, all right, I will put together a bail package and offer it up to the government, and I'll do my best, because I know you got this thing at 4 o'clock. And so I got up, and I was motivated, I was all fired up. I was gonna march down to the presentment, and I was gonna make my bail application for a guy who has been indicted for like 97 or 212 felonies. He's been missing and everything, but I'm gonna make my bail application so that he can be at liberty, because he's got this thing. And I get up and I turn around to open the door, and the door is locked. I can't get out. I'm stuck. And I feel this man's eyeballs burning into the back of my head, looking at me as I'm stuck. And I turn around, and he's there looking at me with his arms folded like this behind the glass, and he says, "Hey, how are you going to get me out? You can't get me out." He didn't get out. He retained counsel. You heard I spent a couple of years at the Department of Defense as the General Counsel of the Air Force, as the General Counsel of the entire Department of Defense. That is the largest, most complicated General Counsel's position in the world, because DoD is the largest government agency in the world. There are over 11,000 attorneys in the Department of Defense. I'm told it is the largest single employer. I had a remarkable time there. I left at the end of 2012 after 4 years of service in the Obama administration, thinking I was done. And I had gone back to private practice at Paul Weiss. I was rebuilding my client base. Barbara called me early in 2012 to ask me if I would deliver this Dyson lecture, and I said yes. And we had set late October of last year for me to come and talk to you. And as you heard, on October 18th, I was nominated by the President to be Secretary of Homeland Security. He asked me on Martha's Vineyard in August if I would take this on, and I was humbled, and I said yes. So we spent 2 months in vetting, no press leaks, we spent 2 months in vetting. And so right after I was nominated, I called Barbara, and I said, I have good news and bad news. Nominees for presidential appointments, except for their confirmation hearings, are not seen or heard. So bad news is I can't give this speech in late October. The good news is, if you wait a little bit, I think you can trade up. I might be able to deliver the Secretary of Homeland Security for you at some point. So here I am. I was sworn in on December 23rd, 2013. I was confirmed by the Senate on December 16th, the week before. It was just before Christmas, so I took the oath in my living room of my permanent home in Montclair, New Jersey, in the presence of my wife, my kids, my parents, my neighbors, the dog, and the Christmas tree. Last week was my 100th day in office. Last Thursday was day 101. It was a really special day. Sometimes I do have some fun in this office. I got to throw out the first pitch at the Mets game. I was a huge Mets fan when I was growing up, and so I was living the dream that day. I made the mistake of waiting until 30 minutes before game time to warm up. I'm 36 years old. You really do need to spend a little more time warming up. I was told, whatever you do, I spoke to Mayor de Blasio that morning. We were throwing out the first pitch on game one. He said, whatever you do, don't throw it in the dirt. Throw it high, throw it over the backstop. Don't throw it in the dirt. They'll boo you. They're Mets fans. They're angry at a lot of things. They're going to boo you no matter what, because you're a public official. And so all I could think about was, don't throw it in the dirt. Don't throw it in the dirt. Don't throw it in the dirt. And I was more nervous for throwing out the first pitch any speech I've ever given, any congressional testimony, any TV appearance. And I got out there, Mookie Wilson was my catcher. And I got out there on the mound, perfect windup, threw it in the dirt. The ball has the scuff mark in the dirt. The simple description of my job is I am the member of the President's Cabinet responsible for the Homeland Security of this country. But if you dig a little deeper, it's much more complicated than that, which is why whenever I describe my job, I need a pad because I have to list the many different responsibilities. The Department of Homeland Security has 240,000 employees. It has a budget of $60 billion. It is the third largest department of our government. We are responsible for counterterrorism, cybersecurity, aviation security, maritime security, border security, security of our land, sea, and airports, nuclear threats to the homeland, chem-bio threats, the administration and enforcement of our immigration laws, the protection of our national leaders, protection of our critical infrastructure in this country, the response to natural disasters, FEMA grants, grants for preparedness, training of our federal law enforcement. Within the Department of Homeland Security, there are 22 agencies or components that include Customs and Border Protection, which is itself the largest federal law enforcement agency in the country, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, CIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, the United States Coast Guard, the United States Secret Service, TSA, and FEMA. And so it is a large, diverse government department, but it has an overarching mission of Homeland Security. As all of you know, the Department of Homeland Security was created in the wake of 9/11 by an act of Congress in 2002. It officially stood up in 2003. Some people have said to me that they believe that it was a mistake to assemble all of these government agencies and components into one. It was the largest realignment of the U.S. government since 1947 when the Department of Defense was created. I strongly disagree. Long before the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, there are various of our European allies and other countries that have had ministries of interior that have the same basic set of missions: border security, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and the like. And when you look at where all of those components I've described were before the creation of DHS, spread across the departments of agriculture, energy, justice, treasury, transportation, Department of Defense, HHS, and even the General Services Administration, makes compelling sense to combine all of these agencies under the broad umbrella of Homeland Security in one department. I've already seen in just 108 days in office the synergies that are brought about by being able to assemble as recently as today for discussion of any potential terrorist threat to our land, sea, and air borders. The advantage of having all of these people who are responsible for the protection of our land, sea, and air borders in one room, in one place. And so when a terrorist or other threat to our border security contemplates entering the country through land, sea, or air, they're met with one federal response from the Department of Homeland Security. The nature of our work is such that no news is good news. And no news cannot lead to complacency. No news is very often the result of the hard work of a lot of men and women in DHS and in the U.S. military, in our intelligence community, and our law enforcement community, who work hard every day to interdict, interrupt plots on the homeland, to secure the borders, to secure the air, and secure the ports. What I like to tell my people is we must be constantly vigilant and agile in responding to the most recent terrorist threats, threats to our border security, threats to our land security, and so forth. In my view, counterterrorism must remain the cornerstone of the Department of Homeland Security's mission. Core Al-Qaeda, as we knew it in 2001, has been, the leadership of core Al-Qaeda has been largely degraded. Its leaders are either captured or killed. There are still some that remain, without a doubt. But since about 2008, 2009, we've seen the rise of Al-Qaeda affiliates, like, for example, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which remains active in efforts and plots to attack the homeland. We've seen various acts, serious, dangerous acts by those committed in this country who we characterize in Washington as lone wolves, those who self-radicalize in response to Al-Qaeda-like propaganda and who, on their own, decide to commit acts of violence at the homeland, within the homeland. We are dealing now with, and evidenced by the attack a year ago, the Boston Marathon. I look forward to attending the Boston Marathon this year on April 21st, and I intend to be at the finish line as a show of support. We worry about foreign fighters going into Syria. As John Brennan, the director of the CIA, said recently, we're concerned about those who go to Syria who are radicalized by extremists present in Syria. We're concerned about foreign fighters who go to Syria for one purpose and are recruited to leave Syria with another purpose. And with our European allies, we are monitoring that situation very, very closely. When I have discussions with my European counterparts, this is an important topic of discussion. In my view, given the trend of the terrorist threat in this country, it becomes all the more important for the U.S. government, the Department of Homeland Security, to build strong relationships with our state and local law enforcement partners, who are very often first responders to incidents in this country, like the Boston Marathon bombing last year. I believe it is crucial that we develop relationships with organizations like the NYPD, for example, which itself has a huge counterterrorism capability. Whenever I travel, I frequently meet with local sheriffs, local police commissioners, mayors, governors, because the relationship between our government and state and local partners is becoming more and more important. In my view, we need to continue to build those bridges. It's also important for purposes of countering violent extremism at home that we develop relationships in the community, which is something the Department of Homeland Security is doing every day. I intend to personally participate in one of these programs in the coming weeks, where I will travel to a group of community organizations to talk to them about the Homeland Security mission. Border security, port security is an indispensable component of our counterterrorism mission. Good border security is a barrier to terrorist threats, drug traffickers, transnational criminal organizations. I'm a big, big believer in where we can, pushing out beyond our borders, Homeland Security. So we have something we're developing called pre-clearance at what we call last point of departure airports, international airports, where we are setting up CBP, a presence of Customs Border Protection officers in foreign airports, and a TSA presence in foreign airports. We opened one of these in Abu Dhabi in the UAE in February, and I'd like to see us build more to prevent people who want to do us harm from getting on the airplane bound for the U.S. in the first place. We have issued advisories to airlines in recent months in response to the latest intelligence streams. We are vigilant in doing that. We routinely check the Interpol database for stolen passport information. When someone who flies within this country, out of this country, or into this country tries to get on board an aircraft with a stolen passport, that is quickly detected by the U.S. government through the Interpol database. when it comes to border security, we have seen recently the phenomenon of third country nationals, what we call third country nationals, people other than U.S. citizens or Mexican citizens crossing our southwest border illegally. This is a phenomenon that's been around for a while, but it is becoming a little more prominent. When I was in South Texas, in Brownsville, in January, shortly after I took office, I visited one of our detention centers near Brownsville. It's about a mile or two from the border. The remarkable thing about that visit, there were 995 detainees that day, only 18% of which were Mexican. The other 82% represented 30 different countries from across the world. This is a phenomenon that we must address. We've seen a spike recently in border crossings by unaccompanied children under the age of 16. Under the law, when we come in contact with a child who's crossed the border, we're required to turn that person over to HHS, which is what we do. But this is an issue we're greatly concerned about. Border security is not simply a matter, in my view, of building taller or wider fences. My predecessor, Janet Napolitano, used to say, if you build a 15-foot wall, I will show you a 16-foot ladder that someone else will build. And so the border security experts tell us that what is key is a risk-based approach to border security. We're also bringing a risk-based approach to aviation security, for example. A risk-based approach means that you focus your resources where you see the threats exist. It's agile, efficient, and effective use of taxpayer money. In our budget submission in February, we asked for an additional $90 million in surveillance equipment for the southwest border, consistent with the risk-based approach to border security, consistent with the risk-based approach to aviation security. We now have Tsa Pre-Check, which is a terrific program. You sign up in advance, you submit certain background information, you're enrolled in Tsa Pre-Check, and you're expedited through the lines. You don't have to take your belt off, you don't have to take your shoes off, and it enables us to focus our resources more on the class of people we know less about who come into the airports. We enforce and administer our immigration laws. Many of you may know that on March 13th, the President announced that he had tasked me with reviewing our deportation policies to see whether we could reprioritize our removal policies in a more humane manner. This is something I've been thinking about, working on since I took office in December, and I am actively thinking about such reforms now. I expect to announce some reforms in the short term. Whatever reforms we develop and announce in the short term, however, will not be a substitute for comprehensive immigration reform that it is up to the Congress to pass. Last year, the Senate passed S-744, which was the Senate version of comprehensive immigration reform. In my view, comprehensive immigration reform passed by the Congress is critical. It's critical to economic growth. It is critical to Homeland security. Comprehensive immigration reform would mean additional border security. It would discourage employers from hiring undocumented immigrants. It would enable farmers, the agriculture industry, to hire undocumented workers through visitor worker programs and the like. And it would provide an earned path to citizenship for those in this country now undocumented who've earned it. There are an estimated 11.5 million undocumented immigrants in this country. They are not going away. They are not going to self-deport. In 11 states now, an undocumented immigrant can have a driver's license. The California Supreme Court ruled recently that an undocumented immigrant has a right to practice law in the state of California. Undocumented immigrants, many of whom came here as children, have been here for years. They are not going away. We simply have to address them. And so many of us believe that as a matter of Homeland security, we should encourage these people to come out of the shadows and become accountable fully in American society. Comprehensive immigration reform is in the House right now, and it cannot be allowed to die there. Cybersecurity is one of our missions at DHS. We're making great advances there. We are responsible for responses to natural disasters. On Sunday, I traveled to Washington State, where I inspected, along with our FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate, our response, our efforts there, dealing with the mudslide that killed something around 33 people. It was a remarkable, coordinated effort, including many people in the community, private citizens, who had joined in, who had been working around the clock for 2 weeks, trying to find their neighbors, trying to help their neighbors. And while I was there, I met people who were on the scene 30 minutes after it happened, who were private citizens working around the clock. FEMA was coordinating an effort that included the NYPD in Washington State. It was a remarkable effort. One of the elected officials that I was there with said, this is what the federal government does best. FEMA's come a long way from the days of Katrina under the leadership of Administrator Fugate. And we have to continue that progress when it comes to response to natural disasters. And I believe we are. Homeland security is the most important function that a government can provide to its people. And I remind the workforce at DHS every day I can of that, of their important mission. September 11th happens to be my birthday. I was born on September 11th, 1957. September 11th, 2001, I drove to work in Manhattan from my home in Montclair, New Jersey. I was looking forward to driving back home that evening for a quiet birthday dinner with my wife and kids. And like many of you in this room, that beautiful weekday was interrupted at 8:48 a.m. By a terrorist attack, the likes of which we had never seen before, and before that moment, to all of us would have been unimaginable. I wandered the streets that day asking myself, what can I do? And I've tried over the last 12 and a half years to answer that question. Out of 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was born, and out of 9/11 was my personal commitment to lead that great department, was also born. So one more thing I'd like to say, which I like to say in speeches. In the name of Homeland Security, it's important that we not sacrifice our values as Americans. In the name of Homeland Security, we can build more walls, we can interrogate more people, we can have more invasive scanners, but we should not do so at the cost of who we are as an American people who pride themselves on their liberty and their privacy and their diversity, and who are people not afraid to fly our flag at the Olympics or to associate freely in public. So I believe that part of my mission is to strike that balance between Homeland Security, the safety of the American people, and preserving our American values. So in terms of my prepared remarks, my goal here was to educate and inform, not necessarily make any news. My main purpose in coming here to this law school was to talk to the students and to talk to you about the value of public service, serving your country. I've had a career in both private practice and public service. I've had a successful career in private corporate law practice, but I believe I found my calling in public service. And one of my mentors at Morehouse College, Benjamin Mays, used to say, and supposedly Winston Churchill may have said it before, that you earn a living by what you get, but you earn a life by what you give. And so I'd like to encourage the law students here who are thinking about a career, think about a career serving your country. You'll find it remarkably rewarding. And so I said the same thing to a group of Yale law students about 2 years ago in a speech sort of comprehensive like this. And what was interesting about it is that the national media covering the speech, I ended the speech the same way. The national media covering the speech, headlines were, DOD lawyer, Pentagon lawyer defends drone strikes. Only the Yale campus newspaper got the important part of my message. Top lawyer at DOD encourages law students to enter public service. So thank you for listening to me. Hope you appreciated my remarks, and I look forward to your questions.
The Secretary has graciously agreed to take just a few questions. The schedule will permit a few, but I hope students will
Actually, I have to go do a cabinet meeting by phone at 6:30.
So that, you know, you're competing with President Obama, not to be. Okay, yes, and then student, raise your hand, someone. Okay, please.
I'm Deborah Cohen. I'm an adjunct professor in civil rights law and litigation, so
And
hopefully
her brother is phenomenal. Her brother is John Cohen, who works at DHS and is a spectacular public servant.
Thank you. Since you've come to DHS, in your observation, what is the most difficult responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security to fulfill without violating civil rights or civil liberties, as we traditionally have understood them?
Well, I don't think there's any one answer to that. Part of our job is to identify individuals of suspicion, whether it's as a matter of aviation security, border security, port security, or here in the Homeland. And it is easy to, I think, let me give you a more specific example. After, this is while I was back in private life, after the Boston Marathon attack and the arrest of these individuals had been made, some people said you should designate them enemy combatants because I suspect of the foreign connections. And that may be the instinct of some people. But in many contexts, it's not a good instinct, because from my DOD days, I know that to be an enemy combatant, you have to be part of an armed enemy force, most often an armed enemy force declared by Congress. And so the impulse to label somebody an enemy combatant, when you're an enemy combatant, you're a lawful military objective. The impulse to label somebody an enemy combatant, I think, is not a good one. And so when someone commits a criminal act individually, including a terrorist criminal act individually, we can't treat them like they're lawful military objectives, or that they should be dealt with by our national security apparatus versus our law enforcement apparatus. Take it a step further, I think we have to guard against identifying individuals of suspicion based on certain types of profiles. And we're developing, I think, really sophisticated ways not to do that. And I think it's going to become more and more of a challenge as the terrorist threat outside of this country becomes more decentralized and more diffuse. And I think it is a challenge when it comes to domestic-based threats, and that's one of the reasons why working with communities is so important. It's one of the things your brother constantly talks to me about. So That's one of our challenges.
A plug for Professor Sasha Greenwald wrote a tremendous law review piece on some of the complexities of identifying who's an enemy combatant and what the implications are. We'll make sure it gets sent to your office.
My name is Louis Fernandez. I'm a 3L here at the law school. I have sort of a compound question for you. Do you think climate change is a Homeland Security issue? And as Secretary of Homeland Security, what do you think you can do to address it?
I think that with climate change and with aging infrastructure and possibly other factors, we're seeing that the effects of natural disasters are becoming more severe. And so, given that response to natural disasters is part of our Homeland Security mission, I think we have to be sensitive to these evolving trends.
Okay, in the back.
Hi, my name is Alex Panera. I'm the 1L here. You seem to praise the NYPD for their counterterrorism program, but as someone who represents the government, doesn't that conflict with your overall goal of preventing terrorism? Would we allow small government police departments to have counterterrorist programs like these?
Well, very often, a large urban police force has the best ability to develop links to the community. And I for one, think the NYPD does a very effective job. You know, they're in New York on the ground. There are places where the federal government can't be. The federal government doesn't have the resources, the person power that the NYPD does in New York City. And the NYPD counterterrorism capability is one of the most effective of any police department in this country, if not the most effective.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we'll just do then these last two, you, and then Secretary's going
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Gino Sosnowski at 2L at Pace Law School. Secretary Johnson, in today's information-rich world and scientific-rich world, knowledge-rich world, how does one in your shoes strike, or in your department, strike the balance of due diligence in making the world safer while striving to protect the civil rights and liberties that are inherent in the Constitution for all Americans?
Well, that's our challenge, isn't it? As I said earlier, very often in Homeland Security, the first impulse is not the best impulse. And so I can build you a very, very secure house, but it's going to look like a prison. And you won't have freedom of movement very easily. Just like we could read everybody's mail, read everybody's internet communications, read everybody's chat rooms, but people have the right to free speech in this country, they have the right to freedom of association, and they have a right to privacy. And so, very often the first impulse is not the right impulse. The second impulse is to strike that exact balance, whether it's people's demagoguery or statements making threats, or whether it comes to aviation security, border security, and the like. And so and DHS is one of the few government agencies, one of the few law enforcement agencies that has a statutorily mandated Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and a statutorily mandated Office of Privacy that report directly to me because of this exact issue. It is important to strike that balance. And so I have those two offices in almost every meeting where we talk about Homeland Security.
Hi, I'm a 3L, Christine Lee. The question that I have for you is actually, I know that you had authored the 200-page page report on that paved the way for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the question that I needed to ask you was, what impact do you think that has had on the military community?
You know, not long after Congress repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I was at Stanford University, and in the fall. And the thing that struck me, as soon as I drove onto the campus of Stanford, was I saw a unit of ROTC in Navy whites marching in formation at Stanford University, which is something that maybe 5 years ago, or 3 years before, would have been unimaginable. And so one of the things that was really heartening to me after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, or before it was about to be repealed, I'd get emails from law school deans or university presidents saying, we're voting today, our board of trustees is voting today to bring the military back on campus to recruit as a result of the repeal of this law. It's had a huge impact on military families. When we were in the middle of the review, one of the things that General Ham and I did, he was my co-chair and my co-author, is we brought into the Pentagon spouses, same-sex spouses of service members. And this was a huge step for them to come into the Pentagon. Because the law was still in place, they couldn't identify who they were married to or who their partner was, but they were willing to come and talk to us in the E-ring of the Pentagon. And one of the things that made a huge impression on me and other members of our working group were statements to the effect of, you have no idea how patriotic my partner is because of the hardship we have to endure to live secretly our private life and him staying in the military, which means living off base, living far off base. I can't come to his promotion ceremonies and so forth, but my partner re-ups every 3 or 4 years because he is so dedicated. And so repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell has made life a lot easier for those who want to serve their country. Just last week when I was at the Mets game, I was getting up to leave and I had invited a group of DHS people to sit with me in this section of Citi Field, and there was one member of the Coast Guard in uniform, and as I was leaving, she stood up and she introduced me to her fiance, and she said, "Thank you so much for what you did. Here's my fiance." And just 3 years before, had this member of the Coast Guard done exactly the same thing, she would have risked separation from the military. So I think we've made the military a stronger place. Thanks, everybody.
We want to thank Secretary Johnson once again. We have a little gift.
Getting a law degree.
Token of our appreciation, and thank you so much.
Let me just ask everyone, please, after the Secretary receives the gift, he will exit with the security detail. Please stay seated if you would until they are out of the classroom.
Thank you very much, everyone.